Agora sim! Muito bom dia, pessoal! Como é que vocês estão? Terça-feira, dia 21. Como é que estão as coisas por aí? Deixa eu entrar aqui também no chat, né? Porque ainda não tem uma tela separada, né? E aí tem que usar os recursos, temos que usar as armas que temos, né? Então, eita. Pelo menos para poder ver o chat aqui. Quem tem acompanhado aí a gente, né? Nós estamos vendo a série de vídeos, né? De educação empreendedora sobre, que é um curso no caso, né, em parceria da YCombinator com a Standford University, né? Então tá sendo um baita curso, tá sendo bem bacana mesmo, eu tô curtindo demais. E aí, no caso, a gente tem ali o Sam Altman, que foi um dos presidentes na época da YCombinator, né? Vocês devem estar vendo ele nas notícias ultimamente, né? Que ele foi ali o CEO da OpenAI, demitiram ele, né? Foi para a Microsoft, não sei se estão trazendo de volta agora. Então, um cara muito foda, o cara é fera mesmo. Deixa eu parar a música aqui porque eu acho que deve estar conflitando, né? Eu falei aqui que a gente está transmitindo a série Como Começar uma Startup, né? How to Start a Startup, né? E o Sam Altman aí, que é era um dos presidentes na época, não sei se continua sendo, mas ele também está nas notícias aí em alta, né? Como o CEO da OpenAI e tudo mais. Então, a gente estava vendo a série, né? A gente viu 9 meses atrás a primeira vez, né? Agora nós estamos vendo pela segunda vez. E o papo de hoje é sobre como levantar dinheiro, né? Então, trouxeram algumas pessoas de fundos de capitais aí bem reconhecidos, né? Como a do Marc Andreesen, a Ron Conway e o Parker Conrad. Então vamos ver o que eles têm para dizer, né? Fiquem à vontade para mandar as perguntas no chat aqui, né? Caso tenham alguma que queiram responder, queiram entender, né? Eu respondo o que eu não souber, eu busco aqui e tento matar ou resolver da melhor, ou explicar da melhor forma, né? Então vamos lá, vamos ver o que tem aqui. Pelo jeito hoje é mais um formato de um painel mesmo, né? Não é explicando muita, só palestra, digamos assim, né?
Start with a question for Marc and Ron, which is by far the number one question. Would be a lengthy answer. What makes you guys decide to invest in a founder or a company? Either of you.
Go ahead. No. You first.
Well, we have a slide on that. We have an app for that.
Marc can start while we try to get your slide up.
Okay.
We're bringing in AP guys, so.
So say the question again.
Go ahead.
What makes you decide to invest in a founder or a company?
So what makes us invest in a company is based on a whole bunch of characteristics. I've been doing this since 1994, right before Marc got out of the University of Illinois. So SV Angel and its entities have invested in over 700 companies. So to invest in 700 companies, that means we've physically talked to thousands of entrepreneurs. And there's a whole bunch of things that just go through my head when I meet an entrepreneur. And I'm just going to the question I ask is, what inspired you to invent this product? I'm hoping that it's based on a personal problem that founder had, and this product is the solution to that personal problem. Then I'm looking for communication skills, because if you're going to be a leader and hire a team, assuming your product is successful, you've got to be a really good communicator and you have to be a born leader. Now, some of that you might have to learn those traits of leadership, but you better take charge and be able to be a leader. I'll switch back to the slide, but let's let Mark.
Yeah, I agree with all that. I guess, and there's a lot of detail to this question that we could talk about, and we may be even a little bit different than Ron, we're different than Ron, that we actually invest across stages. So we invest at the seed stage, venture stage, growth stage, and then we invest in a variety of different business models, consumer, enterprise, and a bunch of other variations. So there are kind of fine-grained answers, that we could get into if there are specific questions. Two general concepts that I would share. So one is the venture capital business is 100% a game of outliers. It's extreme exceptions. Right, so the conventional statistics are, on the order of 4,000 venture fundable companies a year that want to raise venture capital. About 200 of those will get funded by what's considered a top tier VC. About 15 of those will someday get to $100 million in revenue, and those 15 from that year will generate something on the order of 97% of all the returns for the entire category of venture capital in that year. And so venture capital is such an extreme feast or famine business. You're either in one of the 15 or you're not, or you're in one of the 200 or you're not. And so the big thing that you're just looking for, no matter which sort of particular kind of criteria we talk about, they all have the characteristic of you're looking for the extreme outlier. The other thing I'd highlight that we think about a lot internally is we have this concept, invest in strength versus lack of weakness. And at first that's obvious, but it's actually fairly subtle. Which is sort of the default way to do venture capital is to kind of check boxes, right? So, really good founder, really good idea, really good, products, really good initial customers, check. Okay, this is reasonable, I'll put money in it. But what you find with those sort of checks.
Basicamente aqui, né, a minha percepção, né, eu não sou investidor nem nada, né, mas como eles comentaram, é a característica da pessoa ser um líder realmente, ser obcecada pelo produto, né? Obcecado pelo produto é saber, assim, que, tipo, cara, você vai ser extremamente resiliente, né? E não importa, sei lá, 600 não de compras do produto, né? Você vai atrás do sim, né? Então, ser obcecado pelo produto, né? Outras características que ele falou de ser um outlier, né? Um ponto fora da curva e conseguir fazer parte dessa seleção deles, né? Que é um filtro que eles acabam fazendo, né? De 200 negócios investidos e dentro dos 200, os 15 principais que geram mais de 90%, 93% dos fundos, né? Do lucro e tudo mais. Então,
checkbox deals, and they get done all the time. But what you find is they often don't have something that really makes them really remarkable and special, right? They don't have an extreme strength that makes them an outlier. On the other side of that, the companies that have the really extreme strengths often have serious flaws. And so one of the cautionary lessons of venture capital is if you don't invest on the basis of serious flaws, you don't invest in most of the big winners. And we could go through example after example after example of that. But that would have ruled out almost all the big winners over time. And so at least what we aspire to do is to invest in the startups that have a really extreme strength along an important dimension, and then be willing to tolerate some other set of weaknesses.
Ron, we got your slide up.
Okay, I don't want to over dwell on the slide, but when you first meet an investor, you've got to be able to say in one compelling sentence that you should practice like crazy what your product does, so that the investor that you're talking to immediately can picture the product in their own mind. Probably 25% of the entrepreneurs I talk to today still, after the first sentence, I don't know what they do. And as I get older and less patient, I say, back up, I don't even know what you do yet. But so try and get that perfect. And then I want to skip to the second column. You have to be decisive. The only way to make progress is make decisions. Procrastination is the devil in startups. So no matter what you do, you got to keep that ship moving. If it's decisions to hire, decisions to fire, You got to make those quickly. All about building a great team. Once you have a great product, then it's all about execution and building a great team.
Parker, could you talk about your seed round and how that went and what?
Então aqui, ó, vamos pegar alguns pontos aqui do que ele trouxe, né? O que eles buscam, né? Principalmente. Ele falou sobre o ponto de conseguir deixar claro qual é a sua ideia, qual é o seu produto, a sua solução em uma única frase, né? Então, muitas vezes o pessoal acaba usando comparações, né? Tipo, o iFood da educação, ou sei lá, o Uber dos animais, né? Ou sei lá, alguma coisa assim, né? Então, em alguns momentos essa comparação é boa, em outros nem tanto, né? Tem que cuidar para que não fique feio na foto de uma certa maneira, né? Aí eles pegaram ali, né, que tenha um bom pitch, né? Um pitch simples, né? Então, que seja ali decisiveness often tested in building a team, né? Decisivo, né? Buscando testar constantemente, né? O produto em si, né? E a construção do time e tudo mais, né? Geralmente, assim, eu acho que é meio difícil às vezes eles investirem em empreendedores solo, né? Eles acabam considerando todo o perfil de equipe que tem por trás, né? E ponto de saber vender e tudo mais, né? E aí as características pessoais dos fundadores é ter paixão, proativo, né? Conseguir atuar em time, né? Confiar na intuição, né? E tomar boas decisões. E tá, vamos continuar aqui.
Wish you had done differently as a founder, as you might.
Sure. So, actually, I think my seed round, most of the stuff with my current company felt like, from a fundraising perspective, felt like it came together relatively quickly. But actually, one of the experiences that I had, I started a company before this that I was at for about 6 years, and my co-founder and I pitched almost every VC firm in Silicon Valley. I mean, we literally went to like 60 different firms, and they all told us no. And we were constantly trying to figure out, how should we adjust our pitch, and how should we do the slides differently, and how do we tweak the story and that sort of thing. And at one point there was this sort of key insight that someone gave me when I was pitching, actually someone at Coastal Ventures, this VC said, guys, he was looking for some very particular kind of analysis that we didn't have on hand, and he was like, guys, you don't get it. He was like, if you guys were the Twitter guys, you guys could come in and you could just be like, blah, 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 and like, put whatever up here, and like, we would invest in you, but like, you guys aren't the Twitter guys, so you need to make this really easy and have like all this stuff ready for us and all this kind of stuff. And I took like the exactly opposite lesson of what he, I think, wanted me to take away from that with, which was like, geez, like, I should really just figure out a way to be the Twitter guys. And like, that's the way to do this. And so actually, like, one of the reasons I started my current company, or one of the things I found very attractive about Zenefits, is as I was thinking about it, it seemed like a business. I was so frustrated from this experience of having tried, for like 2 years to raise money from VCs, and had sort of decided, like, to hell with it. You can't count on there being capital available to you. And so the business that I started seemed like one that like actually just maybe I could do it without raising money at all. Like, there might be a path to kind of, there was enough cash flow, it seemed compelling enough that I could like do that. And it turns out that those are exactly the kinds of businesses that investors love to invest in. And it made it incredibly easy. So I actually think, like, Sam was very kind and said I was an expert in fundraising. The reality is I don't actually even think I'm very good at fundraising. It's probably something I'm like less good at than sort of other parts of my job. But I think if you can build a business that's where everything's like moving in the right direction, if you can like be the Twitter guys, like nothing else matters. And if you can't like be the Twitter guys, it's very hard for anything else to make a difference, for things to kind of come together for you.
Why did that VC say be like the Twitter guys when the fail whale dominated the site for 2 years?
Because it worked.
Yeah. The other point I want to make is bootstrap as long as you possibly can. I met with one of the best founders in tech who's starting a new company, and I said to her, well, when are you going to raise money?
Because if you do what Parker's done and you build a business that is going to be a gigantic success, then investors are throwing money at you. And if you come in, with a theory and a plan and no data, and you're just one of, the next 1,000, it's going to be far, far harder to raise money. So that's the positive way to put it, is kind of be so good they can't ignore you. In other words, you're almost always better off making your business better than you are making your pitch better. The other thing, that's the positive way of looking at it. The negative way of looking at it, or the cautionary lesson, is that, and this gets me in trouble every single time I say it, but I'm on a ton of flu medication, so I'm going to go ahead and just let it rip. Raising venture capital is the easiest thing a startup founder is ever going to do. As compared to recruiting, right, as compared to recruiting engineers, in particular as compared to recruiting engineer number 20, it's far harder than raising venture capital. Selling to enterprise customers is harder. Getting viral growth going on a consumer business is harder. Getting advertising revenue is harder. Almost everything you'll ever do is harder than raising venture capital. And so I think Parker is exactly right. If you get in a situation in which raising the money is hard, it's probably not hard compared to all the other stuff that's about to follow. And it's very important to bear that in mind. It's often said raising money is not actually a success. It's not actually a milestone for a company, and I think that's true, and I think that's the underlying reason. It puts you in a position to be able to do all the other harder things.
Related to that, what do you guys wish founders did differently when raising money? And specifically, Mark, you mentioned this relationship between money and risk and how that applies here, so maybe we could start with that.
Yeah, so the single biggest thing that people are just missing, and I think it's all of our faults, we're all not talking about it enough, but I think the single biggest thing entrepreneurs are missing, both on fundraising and how they run their companies, is the relationship between risk and cash. So the relationship between risk and raising cash, and then the relationship with risk and spending cash. So I've always been a fan of something that Andy Rachleff taught me years ago, which he calls it the onion theory of risk. Which basically is, you can think about a startup like on day one as having every conceivable kind of risk, right? And you can basically just make a list of the risks. And so you've got, founding team risk, to the founders, or the founders for the entire category of venture capital. Yes, wrote a great book on his startup career, which obviously was very successful. The book's called Born Standing Up. This is harder.
Deixa eu parar aqui rapidão. Era para ter voltado ali só um pouquinho para revisar o negócio, né? Na verdade, ali é o que ele falou, né? Que eu concordo plenamente, né? Seja tão bom que as pessoas não poderão ignorá-lo, né? Então, assim, você tá lá fazendo pitch para investidores, né? Você já passou por mais de 70, 60, sei lá, mais de 100, 200, né? Resiliência quanto a isso, né? Ajustando o seu discurso à medida que você vai recebendo feedbacks negativos, pode fazer com que você depois lá, no caso, vamos dizer que você não consiga um investimento, né? Mas você ter feito discurso para dos mais de, sei lá, 300 VCs, né? Ou investidores anjos, ou o que for, vai fazer com que você, toda vez que você foi ajustando o seu discurso, seu pitch, seus slides, né, sua narrativa, sua história, e tudo aquilo que você está contando, todos os ajustes que foram feitos, mesmo que você não tenha conseguido o financiamento, o investimento e tudo mais, vai fazer com que você tenha refinado tanto, né, a forma de vender e comercializar e a história que teu produto conta, que com certeza vai ser muito mais fácil depois de você vender para os seus clientes, né? E aí, no caso, vender para os clientes é relacionado ao que ele falou de bootstrap, né? No caso, talvez não, né? Você começar com nenhum investimento ou um investimento pessoal seu, né? E crescer à medida que você consegue ir captando clientes, né? Então, tem sempre um lado positivo de você receber uma sequência, uma série grande de nãos, né? Que é o refinamento do seu discurso, da sua solução, do seu negócio, né? E a capacidade que vai lhe dar de você ter muito mais confiança e propriedade naquilo que você está falando, daquilo que você está dizendo para seja investidor ou para stakeholders em geral.
I think the single biggest thing entrepreneurs are missing is risks, right? And then the way that I always think about running a startup is also the way I think about raising money, which is it's a process of peeling away layers of risk as you go, right? And so you raise seed money in order to peel away the first 2 or 3 risks, right? The founding team risk, the product risk, maybe the initial launch risk. You raise the A round to peel away the next level of product risk. Maybe you peel away some recruiting risk because you get your full engineering team built. Maybe you peel away some customer risk because you get your first 5 beta customers, right? And so basically the way to think about it is you're peeling away risk as you go. You're peeling away risk by achieving milestones. And then as you achieve milestones, you're both making progress in your business and you're justifying raising more capital, right? And so you come in and you pitch somebody like us and you say you're raising a B round. You know, the best way to do that with us is you say, okay, I raised a seed round, I achieved these milestones, I eliminated these risks. I raised the A round, I achieved these milestones, I eliminated these risks. Now I'm going to raise a B round, here are my milestones, here are my risks. And then by the time I go to raise a seed round, here's the state that I'll be in. And then you calibrate the amount of money that you raise and spend to the risks that you're pulling out of the business. And I go through all this, in a sense this sounds kind of obvious, but I go through all this because it's a systematic way to think about how the money gets raised and deployed, as compared to so much of what's happening, especially these days, which is just, oh my God, let me go raise as much money as I can, let me go build the fancy offices, let me go hire as many people as I can, and just kind of hope for the best.
I'm going to be tactical. For sure, don't ask people to sign an NDA. We rarely get asked anymore because most founders have figured out that if you ask somebody for an NDA at the front end of the relationship, you're basically saying, I don't trust you. So the relationship between investors and founders involves lots of trust. The biggest mistake that I see by far is not getting things in writing. You know, my advice on the fundraising process is do it as quickly and efficiently as you possibly can. Don't obsess over it. For some reason, founders get their ego involved in fundraising where it's a personal victory. It is the tiniest step on the way, as Marc said, and it's the most fundamental. Hurry up and get it over with. But in the process, when somebody makes a commitment to you, you get in your car and you type an email to them that confirms what they just said to you. Because a lot of investors have very short memories, and they forget that they committed to you that they were going to finance, or they forget what the valuation was, or that they were going to find a co-investor. You can get rid of all that controversy just by putting it in writing, and when they try and get out of it, you just resend the email and say, excuse me. And hopefully they've replied to that email anyway, so get it in writing. In meetings, take notes, and
Então, esse é um ponto, né, que muitas pessoas podem achar controverso, né, mas eu acho que faz total sentido, né. Você pedir uma NDA logo no começo do relacionamento com um investidor, né, provavelmente vai fazer com que você seja mal visto porque ele vai achar que você não confia, né. Isso muitas vezes não se aplica a negócios que você está fazendo com outras empresas, com outros parceiros e coisa do gênero. É uma forma de se blindar, né, diante da não divulgação de conteúdo, não divulgação daquilo que as partes têm ali referente à entrega final, digamos assim, né? Só que eu concordo em partes, né? Não sei dizer bem certo como são os fundos de investimentos aqui no Brasil em relação a isso, né? O fato de você pedir uma NDA e tudo mais, né? O quanto levam esse ponto em consideração, mas é algo que pelo jeito lá fora não é muito bem visto, né? Então,
follow up on what's important.
I want to talk a little bit more about tactics here. Just how does the process go? Can people email you guys directly? Do they need to get an introduction? How many meetings does it take for you to make a decision? How do you figure out what the right terms are? When can a founder ask you for a check?
You wanna?
That was like 6 questions.
That's a lot of things.
Yeah. Okay. Good.
It's the process.
Why don't you describe? Because you'll describe seed, and then I'll describe.
Yeah. So SV Angel, invests in seed stage startups. So we like to be the very first investor. We normally invest today in a round that's $1 million to $2 million. It used to only be $1 million. So if we invest $250K, that means there's 5 or 6 other investors in that syndicate. SV Angel has now a staff of 13 people. I do no due diligence anymore. I am not a picker anymore. I just help on major projects for the portfolio companies that are starting to mature. But we have a whole team that processes. We at SV Angel end up investing in 1 company for every 30 that we look at, and we end up investing in about 1 a week. I think what's interesting is we don't really take anything over the transom. Our network is so huge now that we basically just take leads from our own network. We evaluate the opportunity, which means you have to send in a really great short executive summary. And if we like that, we actually vote, although I'm not in this meeting anymore, but the group actually votes on, do we make a phone call? That's how important time is in this process. And if enough of the team at SV thinks it's interesting, then they appoint a person to make a phone call to that founder, usually somebody on our team who has domain experience. If the phone call goes well, bingo, we want to meet you. If SV Angel asks you for a meeting, we are well on our way to investing. If that meeting goes well, we'll do some background checks, backdoor background checks, get a good feeling about the company, the market that they're going after, and then make the commitment to invest, and then start helping get other value-add investors to be part of the syndicate. Because if we're going to have an equal workload, we want the other investors in this company to be great angel investors as well.
So I'll talk a little bit about the venture stage, kind of the Series A stage, that follows. So to start with, I think it's fair to say at this point that all the top tier venture capitalists pretty much only invest in 2 kinds of companies at the Series A stage. One is if they have previously raised a seed round. And so it's almost always the case when we're doing a Series A investment that the company has $1 million or $2 million of seed financing, from Ron and folks that he likes to work with. Almost always, by the way, Ron, just to be clear, and folks he likes to work with. So first, either they have a seed round. So if you're going to raise Series A, the first thing to do is raise seed, because that's generally the way the progression works at this point. Every once in a while, we'll go straight to A on a company that hasn't raised a seed round. Really, the only times though that happens are when it's a founder who has been a successful founder in the past. And is almost certainly somebody we've worked with in the past. So we have an announcement. We just did one of these. We'll announce in a few weeks, where it's a founder who I was an angel investor. Actually, I think Ron was also in the team's company in like 2006. And then the company did its thing, and then ultimately was acquired by another big company. And then that team now is starting their new thing. So in that case, we're just going to jump it straight to an A because they're so well known and they have a plan all lined up for it. But that's the exception. It's almost always preceded by a seed round.
Só um pouquinho, pessoal. Já volto bem rapidinho. pegaram aí mais ou menos como é que é as etapas, né, processo aqui deles, né? Começa ali com o capital semente, começa com o bootstrap, depois vai atrás de um capital semente, né? Depois vai atrás de um Series A, um Series B, por aí vai, né? Então é meio que seguir, eu acredito que realmente é mais fácil você conseguir recurso, né? Conseguir capital à medida que você avança nesses estágios.
The other thing is, I guess I mentioned this already, but we get, similar to what Ron said, we get 2,000 referrals a year through.
Caramba, eu acho que... Deixa eu ver uma coisa aqui.
Our referral network. A very large percentage of those are referrals through the seed investors, and so by far the best way to get the best introductions to the A stage venture firms is to work through the seed investors, or to work through something like Y-Combinator.
Speaking about term.
Eu achei que é porque aqui só, desculpa a preocupação, né? Mas é que você tem que fazer todo o ajuste necessário aqui para ter microfone e aqui também tem a saída, né, de alto-falante e é o áudio direto do PC. Mas pelo jeito só no microfone eu acho que funciona bem, né? Espero, né? Em breve eu vou melhorar bastante o áudio e a qualidade aí com novos equipamentos.
What terms should founders care most about, and how should founders negotiate? Maybe Parker can start with you on this one.
Sure. Well, I think probably precisely because of what Mark said, the most important thing at the seed stage is picking the right seed investors, because they're going to sort of lay the foundation for future fundraising events. They're going to make the right introductions. And I think there's an enormous difference in the quality of an introduction. So if you can get a really good introduction from someone who a venture capitalist really trusts and respects, the likelihood that that's going to go well is so much higher than sort of like a much more lukewarm introduction from someone they don't know as well. So at the seed stage, probably the best thing you can do is find the right investors, and then.
How does the founder know who the right investors are?
Well, I think it's really hard. I mean, so one of the best ways, not to give a plug for YC, but YC does a very good job of telling you exactly who they think those people are, and can really direct you towards. And I actually have found it to be like pretty accurate in terms of like who you guys said were going to be the best people. Like they ended up being the most helpful as we were raising subsequent rounds. Sort of really provided the best introductions, and the people who maybe I thought were seemed okay, but we're not, we're not as sort of highly rated by YC. Like they ended up being the case that they were kind of like real duds in the seed round.
Someday we're going to publish our list of these people.
Oh my God, there are going to be a lot of upset people when we do.
So how do you think about negotiation? How do you figure out what the right valuation for a company is and what other terms?
Well, so I started out, like when I was raising my seed round, I really didn't know. And I mean, we had conversations about this. I probably started a little too high on the valuation side. So as you guys know, like Y-Combinator sort of culminates in this thing called Demo Day, where you get sort of all of these investors at once who are looking at the company. And I started out trying to raise money at like a $12 or a $15 million cap, which is like not quite the same thing as a valuation, but sort of roughly equivalent. And everyone was like, "That's crazy. That's completely nuts. They're like you're like too big for your britches. Like that's completely just wouldn't work." And so I ended up sort of walking it down a little bit, and within sort of the space of a couple days, said, "Okay, well, I'm going to raise it 9." And then suddenly, for whatever reason, that had sort of hit some magical threshold on the seed stage that it was below 10. That it seemed like there was like almost infinite demand for the round at a 9 million cap. So no one would pay 12, but at a $9 million cap, it felt like I probably could have raised like $10 million. And the round came together, in roughly about a week. At that point, once I kind of hit that threshold. And so there seemed to be, and they probably fluctuate over time, but there seem to be these sort of like thresholds, particularly for seed stage companies, that investors will think of as like, this is what, like above this level is like crazy, that like doesn't matter. And there's sort of like a rough kind of range that people are willing to pay. And so you just kind of like you have to just kind of figure out what that is. Get the money that you need. Don't raise any more than you need, and just kind of get it done. And at the end of the day, like whether you raise at 12 or 9 or like 6, it's not a huge deal for the rest of the company.
Is there a maximum amount of the company you think that founders should sell in their seed round and A round, beyond which problems happen? For any of you.
I feel like that's a better question for you.
Well, gosh, I don't know. I mean, I think I don't know the rules on this stuff. I think the tricky thing is, it seems like they're kind of rough, particularly for like a Series A. You're probably going to sell somewhere between 20 and 30% of the company, because below venture capitalists tend to be a lot more ownership focused than price focused. So you might find that it's actually sometimes when companies raise really big rounds.
Tá, aqui, né, o que ele colocou aqui, o que ele trouxe para nós, é o fato, né, de ter claro quais que são os termos, né, quais que são as condições relativas a você conseguir o investimento, né. Ele trouxe ali sobre o fato de que no começo eles estavam buscando ali 15 milhões, diminuíram, conseguiram ter mais aceitação, né. Então, eu acho que assim, antes de você ir buscar investimento, define um objetivo. O objetivo do investimento é X, né? Vamos lá, vamos supor 3 milhões. O objetivo do nosso investimento é buscar 3 milhões. Ali no pitch, é meio óbvio, né, para investidor, quando você vai fazer pitch para investidor, que você tenha claro um planejamento financeiro de como você quer levar aquilo para os investidores. Onde que você vai investir os 3 milhões, né? Então você coloca lá, dos 3 milhões, 600 mil eu vou investir em marketing, 300 mil eu vou investir na captação, no pagamento dos salários, né? 900 mil eu vou investir na plataforma tecnológica do produto, né? E por aí vai. Então assim, tenha em mente o quanto você quer pedir investimento, como vai ser utilizado esse investimento e por que esse investimento, né? Porque é necessário esse tipo de investimento, e uma forma relacionada à saída também, né? Eu acho que eles vão falar posteriormente, mas a ideia da saída é justamente conseguir oferecer uma opção para o investidor de que ele possa resgatar o investimento que ele fez, né? Através seja da venda dos equities ali, né? Ou do lucro, né? E tudo mais que acabou tendo. Então, e aí ele está falando agora sobre a diluição máxima, né? Então, a melhor forma de diluir o investimento que você está buscando, né? Então, vou deixar ele terminar de falar aqui, depois eu comento mais um pouquinho.
It's because the investor basically said, listen, I'm not going to go below 20% ownership, but I'll pay more for it. And so, and above 30%, probably sort of weird things happen to the cap table. Like it gets hard, down the line to sort of, for there to be enough room on the cap table for everyone. And so everything seems to come in that range. So that probably just is what it is in most cases. So at the seed stage, what I've heard, there doesn't seem to be any magic to it, but it seems like 10 to 15% is what people say. But that's mostly just what I've heard. I'm curious in your guys' thoughts.
I agree with all that. I think it's important to get the process over with. But I think it's important for the founder to say to themselves in the beginning, at what point does my ownership start to demotivate me? Because if there's like a 40% dilution in an angel round, I've actually said to the founder, do you realize you've already doomed yourself? You're going to own less than 5% of this company if you're a normal company. And so these guidelines are important. The 10 to 15%, Because if you keep giving away more than that, there's not enough left for you and the team, and you're the ones doing all the work.
Well, actually, we'll walk. We've seen a series of interesting companies in the last 5 years we just walk. Simply, we won't bid simply on the basis of their cap tables already destroyed. Outside investors already own too much. There was a company we really wanted to invest in, but the outside investors already owned 80% of it when we talked to them. And it was still a relatively young company. They had just done 2 early rounds that had just sold too much of the company. And literally, we were worried, and I think accurately so, that it was going to be demotivating for the team to have that structure.
One more question before we open it up to the audience for Ron and for Mark. Could you guys both tell the story of the most successful investment you've ever made and how that?
Antes de responder disso, né, tem um ponto referente, né, a quantos por cento você vai ceder, no caso, né, ou vai repassar para investidores da sua empresa. Cara, eu sou da filosofia, né, que nunca deveria passar assim dos sei lá, 30%, né? Você tem que ter um controle da maior parte da sua empresa com você, né? Por exemplo, assim, tô buscando um investidor ali, tem uma equipe pequena e tudo mais, e eu vou buscar um investimento de 2 milhões por 50% da empresa. Tá, por que isso, né? A não ser que sejam, geralmente vai ser, né? Mas que o investidor seja muito bom, tenha uma boa linha de negócios, né? Um bom discernimento e estratégias de investimento, né? A não ser que ele seja um cara muito foda mesmo, eu acredito que você não deve dar grandes quantidades, né? Grandes porcentagens da sua empresa, justamente porque se você criou um negócio e você que quer direcionar as tomadas de decisão, né? Você precisa ter a maior parte da empresa. Entretanto, quando você tem sócios junto com você, né, e você precisa galgar cada vez mais confiança dos sócios, né, e você apoiar eles de uma forma que eles possam ser ainda mais relevantes para o negócio, você vai cedendo cada vez mais porcentagem, né? Então vai aumentando ali assim, ó, a porcentagem da, sei lá, 3, 6 sócios que você tem ou coisa do gênero, né? Então, tenham claro, no caso, né, que por um lado, no caso de ceder uma alta porcentagem para fundos de capitais, né, fundos de investimento, pode fazer com que você consiga talvez mais dinheiro. Mas eu acho que no médio e longo prazo não é tão bom assim, né? Na minha opinião. Não sei o que vocês pensam, né? Mas eu acredito que você que é o dono de negócio, que você garante que as estratégias estejam sendo desdobradas e que a operação esteja sendo bem realizada. Então você que tem que ter a maior porcentagem.
Other than benefits.
Other than benefits.
Yeah, other than benefits. For me, clearly, it was the investment in Google in 1999, and we got Google return out of it. But funny enough, I met Google through a Stanford professor, David Cheriton, who's in the School of Engineering. He's still here. He was actually an angel investor in Google and an investor in our fund. And kind of the quid pro quo we have with our investors in the fund is you have to tell us about any interesting company that you see. And we loved it that David Cheriton was an investor in our fund because he had access to the computer science department's deal flow. And we were at this party at Vivek Ranadive's house in full tuxedo. I hate tuxedos. And did anyone here know David Cheriton? Because you know for sure he does not like tuxedos, and he was in a tuxedo. But I went up to him and we complained about our attire. And then I said, hey, what's happening at Stanford? And he says, well, there's this project called Backrub, and it's search by page rank and relevancy. And back in today, page rank and relevancy, everyone says, oh, that's so obvious. In 1998, that was not obvious. that engineers were designing a product based on this thing called PageRank. And all it was a simple algorithm that said if a lot of people go to that website and other websites direct them there must be something good happening on that website. That was the original algorithm. And the motivation was relevance. So I said to David, I have to meet these people. And he said, you can't meet them till they're ready, which was the following May, funny enough. I called them every month for 5 months. And finally got my audition with Larry and Sergey. And right away they were very strategic. They said, we'll let you invest if you can get Sequoia. We don't know Sequoia, but they're investors in Yahoo. And because we're late to market, we want an OEM deal with Yahoo. So I earned my way into the investment in Google.
So I'll tell one on the other side, which is Airbnb, which we actually were not early investors in. We did Airbnb as a growth round. We did the first big growth round on Airbnb, at about $1 billion valuation in 2011. And I think that will turn out to be, I believe that will turn out to be one of the spectacular growth investments of all time. We'll see, but I think it's going to be, I think this is really going to be one of the big companies. So I'll tell that story because it's not a story of pure genius. It's a, we passed it. We didn't even meet with them. I don't think we met with them the first time around, or maybe one of our junior people did. But it was one of these, I said earlier that venture capital is entirely a game of outliers, right? One of the key things with outliers is the ideas often seem completely nuts up front. And so, of course, the idea of a website where you can have other people stay in your house, if you just made a list of the ideas that are most nuts, that would be right there at the top. And then
a very nice email from you, Pastor.
Yeah, good. Hopefully I was very courteous in my stupidity. Well, the second most stupid idea you could possibly think of is a website where you can stay in other people's houses. And so the Airbnb uniquely combines both of those bad ideas. So, of course, it turns out they've unlocked an entirely new way to basically software eats real estate. They've unlocked this just gigantic network effect. It's a gigantic global phenomenon. It's going to be an enormously successful company. So part was just coming to grips with the fact that we had whiffed on our initial analysis of the idea, and that the numbers were clearly proving that we were wrong, and the customer behavior was clearly proving that we were wrong. So one of our philosophies at our firm is we're multi-stage. The big reason for that is so we can fix our mistakes, and we can pay up to get in later when we screw up early on. The other thing I'll highlight, though, is the other reason why we pulled the trigger at a high valuation when we did was because we had spent time at that point with the founders, with Brian and with Joe and with Nate. And there's a friend of mine in private equity has this great line. Egon Durbin has this great line. He says, as people progress through their careers, they get bigger and bigger jobs, and at some point they get the really big job. And it's some people, about half people grow into the big job, and about the other half people swell into it. Right, and you can kind of tell the difference. There's a point when people just lose their minds, and one of the issues with these companies that are sort of super successful hyper-growth companies is, this Airbnb was sort of the classic case of these super young founders who hadn't run anything before. So how are they going to be at running, this sort of giant global operation? And we just were tremendously impressed, and are today every time we deal with all three of those guys. How mature they are, how much they're progressing. It's like they get more and more mature, they get better and better judgment, and they get more and more humble as they grow. And so that made us feel really good that not just was this business going to grow, but that these were guys who were going to be able to build something and be able to run it in a really good way.
Então, eita porra.
Order is on the order of 4,000 venture fundable companies.
Vocês viram, né? Que eles falaram ali sobre o investimento da Google, né, e o investimento do Airbnb, né? Então, cara, não poderiam ser os melhores, acho que os melhores investimentos do mundo, né? Google, ó, vamos fazer uma conta aqui rápida, né? Vamos ver, ó, how much Google works. Ó, 1,7 trilhões de dólares. 1,7 trilhões de dólares. How much good Airbnb? $84 bilhões, tá? pegar a calculadora aqui. Tá. Deixa eu ver se... Cara, é que tem algumas variáveis que tem que levar em consideração, né? Então... Investing Calculator. Direct Slips. 1,7 trilhões e 84 bilhões, né? Então, ó. Deixa eu ver se tem, abre outra aqui. Share. Tá, vamos ver se a gente consegue utilizar essa aqui, ó. Aqui, né, o número, total number of shares, é o equity share, né? Então, quantos por cento o fundo de investimento vai ter da empresa a partir do momento que começar a colocar dinheiro na empresa, né? Então aqui, ó, vamos supor ali que SV Angels pegou 9%, né? Qual que é o vesting period? Vesting é a forma, na verdade, que você tem de fazer o investimento ao longo do tempo, né? E a possibilidade de você também estar relacionada a você poder pegar mais capital ao longo do tempo, mas também está relacionada à forma com que você vai fazer a retirada do valor em si, né? Então, eu não sou especialista aqui, né, em fundo de investimento e tudo mais, e o Cliff, para ser bem sincero, eu não sei te dizer o que significa. Cliff Mini Investments. Eu não sou especialista, mas eu prometo que para a próxima vez que a gente for gravar né, justamente esse episódio, a gente vai trazer um especialista para falar sobre o assunto, né, de fundos de investimento, né, para discutir junto comigo, fazer algo combinado, né. O que é o Cliff? Ele é o período de tempo que precisa passar antes que qualquer opção can start to vest, né? Antes que qualquer opções possam começar a se tornar investir. After which they do so set schedule. Typically, a cliff is one year must pass before an employee options card starts to vest. Tenho que ler a respeito, tenho que estudar mais, mas estou fazendo isso junto com vocês, né? Então vamos colocar aqui, ó, o Cliff, ele falou Cliff de 1 ano, né? Vamos botar 1 ano e meio, 18 meses, né? Vamos botar aqui o período de investimento aqui, ó, Start Invest Date, começou, ele falou em 99, né? 99. Vamos colocar aqui, ó, dia 9 de 6 de 1999. Tá? E aí o vesting period, né? Tempo de investimento em si, né? Tempo de vesting. Considerando ali o que ele comentou em si, né? Vamos dizer que vamos colocar aqui 2 anos, né? 36 meses dá 3 anos. Tá. Tá, essa calculadora aqui não me ajudou da melhor forma. Future Vest Date. Vamos dizer que ele... eu acho que o Future Vest Date está relacionado ao resgate em si, né? Então vamos dizer que ele ia resgatar no dia de ontem, né? Tá, isso aqui, só que eu queria uma calculadora em cima do valor, né? Investing Calculator, Investments. Investment, eu acho que essa aqui é melhor. Investment Calculator. Sim, vamos voltar aqui. Tá, Investment Round Calculator. Ó, vamos lá, como é que é o nome dele? Enfim, não precisa. Vamos botar. Vamos botar Matheus Aimai aqui. Matheus Aimai. Eu investi 9% também no Google, né? E o Ron Parker investiu menos, investiu 6 naquela época, né? Tá. Pre-money issuance. Pre-money issuance. Issuance nesse caso aqui, ó. Deixa eu até buscar a tradução literal aqui. Pre-money issuance é o... Eita, porra. Isso é... Issuance. Emissão, né? Tá. Vamos voltar aqui. Parker, investment round, pre-money issuance. Aqui ele botou 10, né? Vamos botar 12. Numbers of share. 12. 15. Tá, enfim. O dinheiro, a quantidade de dinheiro por ação, né? Vamos dizer que per share, né? Não por parte da empresa, né? Vamos dizer que a gente colocou ali, sei lá, 360 e 810. Não, por ação. Não, peraí, que eu acho que 360. Sim, tá. Per share. Tá. Vamos ver aqui, ó. Cara, eu preciso ensinar mais sobre isso, mas que eu não tô achando uma boa suficiente aqui, ó. Vamos ver essa aqui, ó. O que você busca? Vamos dizer que com nós lá eles buscavam 3 milhões. Tá? Aí, qual que foi o montante inicial? O montante inicial foi 60.300. Depois de 10 anos, adicionar a contribuição, 10 anos 99, né? Vamos botar aqui 99, 2009, 2019, 24 anos. Tá, aqui eu tô na taxa de retorno. Porra, eu preciso. Bom, melhoro na próxima, né? Vou estudar aqui sobre calculadoras de investimento e como conseguir fazer, mostrar para vocês se ele tivesse investido ali um valor baixo, quanto que ele teria de retorno agora no final desse ano, né, ou ano anterior. Então vou fazer isso aqui, ó, porque senão eu não estou dando o direcionamento ideal, adequado e chegando na linha racional que eu gostaria de ter. Então vou retornar ali e preparo melhor para a próxima aí sobre essa parte de investimento. Mas enfim, né? Negócio bilionário e trilionário, com certeza, digamos que o retorno mais baixo possível foi um retorno multimilionário, né? Então, de uma maneira geral, né? Eita.
People always ask me, why do you think Airbnb is such a great company? It's funny, we're obsessing over Airbnb. But, and I say to people, it's because all three founders are as good as the other founder. That is very rare. In the case of Google, two founders, one of them is a little better than the other one. But hey, he's the CEO. Every company has a CEO.
I think we just got the TechCrunch headline.
Every company has a CEO. Yeah. Every company.
Ele deve ter falado do Brian Chesky e do Joey Jebbia. Acho que é Joey Jebbia, né? Enfim, são os...
Every company has a CEO. Why am I saying this? When you start a company, you have to go find somebody as good or better than you to be the co-founder. If you do that, your chances of success grow astronomically. And that's why Airbnb became so successful so quickly. The anomaly is Mark Zuckerberg at Facebook. Yes, he has an awesome team, but the Mark Zuckerberg phenomenon, where it's mainly one person, that is the outlier. So when you start a company, you have got to find phenomenal co-founders.
All right, audience questions. Yes.
So, obviously the conventional wisdom about why you raise money is because you need it. But the more I get off the conventional wisdom, the more I'm starting to hear another story about why you raise money. And I'm actually hearing founders say it's more to facilitate the big exit, or in the worst case, to facilitate the acqui-hire instead of just fizzling out into nothing. To what extent is that accurate thinking or philosophy?
Does raising money help you with an exit or an acqui-hire?
Well, if you pick good investors who have good Rolodexes and domain expertise in what you're...
Pera aí, que eu não sei o que é Rolodexes. Vamos ver. Mini Rolodexes. A desktop card index used to record names, address, telephone numbers in the form of a rotated spindle or small tray, which is removable card attached. Vamos ver se ele traz em português aqui. Eu entendi a tradução, mas fiquei meio que com dificuldade de pegar o principal ponto aqui. Rolodexes. A brand name for a circular file of cards on which you keep people's name or address. Ah, tá. É como se fosse um arquivo, né? Um arquivo onde você mantém ali uma série de cartões, né? De cartões por exemplo, de visita, né? Para ter ali endereço, contato da pessoa e tudo mais, né? Uma marca disso, né? Como se fosse é um dispositivo de arquivo rotativo usado para analisar informações de contato comercial, também fabricados pela Newell Rubbermaid. Esse pelo jeito aqui é esse negócio aqui, ó. Sai, pô. Eita. Tá, enfim. entenderam, né? É um negócio que segura cartões, um grande negócio ali para potencializar o network.
Company does, they're going to add a lot more value than the money. And those are the types of investors you should be looking for.
Yeah, so the answer to the question is clearly yes, but also in a sense it doesn't matter, because you can't plan these things according to the downside. And so, I mean, that's the scenario you are not, or obviously you're not hoping for. And so, while the answer is yes, probably that shouldn't enter into the decision-making process too much. It might enter into which investor to raise money from. It probably doesn't enter into the whether to raise money question that much, I don't think.
You tend to start a business which is fairly capital intensive. You still want to end up with some equity. Do you guys have any advice about how to deal with that? Because you're talking about demotivation and so on. Not everything is like you start some software, it's viral, whatever else.
What should founders do for capital-intensive companies to still retain ownership?
So this is, I would double down on my previous comments on the onion theory of risk and the staging of risk and cash, which is the more capital intensive the business, the more intense and serious you have to be about exactly what's going to be required to make the business work and what the staging of milestones and risks are. Because in that case, you want to line up, you want to be very precise of lining up, because the risk is so high that it'll go sideways, right? So, like, you want to be very precise what you're going to accomplish with your A round and what's going to be a successful execution of the A round, because if you raise too much money in the A round, that'll seriously screw you up, right, later on down the road, and because you're going to raise the C, D, E rounds, and then the cumulative dilution will get to be too much. And so you have to be precise on every single round. You have to raise as close to the exact right amount of money as possible, and then you have to be as pure and clean and precise with the investors as you can possibly be about the risks and the milestones. But this, by the way, is a big thing. This is actually, I'm really glad you asked the question. It kind of goes back to what Parker said. Like, look, if you walk into our firm and you've got Twitter or you've got Pinterest or you've got something and it's just viral growth and it's just on fire and it's just going to go, like, those are the easy ones. Like, it's just like, let's put money in it and let's just feed the beast and off it goes. But if you walk in and you're like, I got this really great idea, but it's going to take $300 million staged out over the next 5 years, probably across 5 rounds, it has a potentially very big outcome. But boy, like, this is not Twitter. Like, this is going to be serious heavy lifting to be able to get there. We will still do those, but the operational excellence on the part of the team matters a lot more. And one of the ways that you convey the operational excellence is in the quality of the plan. And so back to the Steve Martin thing, be so good they can't ignore you. The plan should be very precise.
And there are ways, if you're capital equipment intensive, there are ways of borrowing money in addition to venture capital.
Yeah, sir. You can kick in, right? You can kick in a venture debt and then later on lease financing. But again, that underlines the need for operational excellence, because if you're going to raise debt, then you really need to be precise on how you're running the company, because it's very easy to trip the covenants on a loan and it's very easy to lose the company.
Bem legal. Muito bacana. Eu, enquanto eu tava lendo aqui, prestando atenção também o que ele estava falando aqui no último ponto, né? Eu pensei aqui que talvez possa ser interessante a gente analisar um ponto referente à tese de investimento da SV Angels e da empresa do Marc Andreesen, tá? Então, Marc Andreesen eu acho que é Andreesen Horowitz, alguma coisa assim, né? Andreesen Horowitz, alguma coisa. Marc Andreesen Firm. VC Firm. Andreesen Horowitz. Aqui, ó. A16Z. E ó. SV Angels Investment Thesis. A16Z Investment Thesis. Já dá para ter uma ideia, né? Pô, se eles foram um dos precursores do Google também, né? Basicamente ele fala aqui, ó, nós investimos em fundadores focados no longo prazo que querem ajudar a criar o impacto e estendê-lo muito além dos negócios, né? Então, ó, Deixa eu ver aqui. SV Angel. Overview. Approach. SV Network Effect. Conectar grandes ideias e ter um grande impacto, um melhor impacto. Nós somos conhecidos por trabalhar rápido e conectar membros e redes, né? Líderes da indústria, reguladores, tá? Action points. Enfim, o que eu quero dizer com tese de investimento, tá? Tese de investimento é entender qual que é a estratégia que aquela firma ou fundo de investimento tem para fazer os seus investimentos, né? Que tipo de negócios eles analisam, né? E de que formato eles fazem o aporte, né? Tanto a entrada como a retirada do capital, né? Então, era isso que eu queria buscar aqui, mas é outra coisa que eu vou trabalhar melhor para a próxima, tá? Para já ter mais na mão. Mas aqui, agora, enfim, eu vou deixar esse ponto para vocês verificarem. Entrem no site ali, ó, Andreessen Horowitz, SV Angels, né? Procura ali, lê a respeito, né? Vê o que tem ali sobre os negócios que eles buscam investir, né? Portfólio, o que eles oferecem, né? Qual que é... e, enfim, verifiquem aí, analisem. Na próxima eu faço melhor.
And so it's a thread the needle process that demands just sort of a more advanced level of management than sort of the next Snapchat.
What are some bad sides for investors that you shouldn't work with for your company?
Yeah, this is a good question. How do you know what's the side that you should avoid as a particular investor?
Well, it's the inverse of what I said about a good investor. If it's an investor who has no domain expertise in your company, does not have a Rolodex where they can help you with introductions, both for business development and in helping you do the intro.
15, 20 years, you may notice, is longer than the average American marriage. This is significant. The choice of key investors, in particular investors who are going to be on the board for a company, I think is just as important as who you get married to, which is extremely important. These are people you're going to be living with and partnering with and relying on and dealing with in in conditions of great stress and anxiety for a long period of time. And the big argument I always make is, and I make this all the time. Sometimes people believe it, sometimes they don't. Which is like, if everything just goes great, it kind of doesn't matter who your investors are. But almost never does everything just go great, right? Even the big successful companies, even the big, Facebook and all these big companies that are now considered very successful, along the way, all kinds of shit went, shit hit the fan over and over and over and over again. And there are any number of stressful board meetings and discussions and late night meetings with the future of the company at stake, where everybody really has to be on the same team and have the same goals and be pulling in the same direction and have a shared understanding and have the right kind of ethics and the right kind of staying power, to be able to actually weather the storms that come up. And one of the things that you'll find that is a big difference between first-time founders versus second-time founders is almost always the second-time founders take that point much more seriously after they've been through it once. And so it really, really, really matters. I always thought, and I believe that it does, it really matters who your partner is. It really is like getting married, and it is worth putting the same amount of time, maybe not quite as much time and effort into picking your spouse, but it is worth spending significant time really understanding who you're about to be partnered with, because that's way more important than, did I get another $5 million in the valuation, or did I get another $2 million in the check?
The marriage analogy is great. I know at SV Angel, our attitude is when we invest in an entrepreneur, we are investing for life. Because we want to invest in, if we made the right decision, we're going to invest in every company they start. And once an entrepreneur, always an entrepreneur. So we actually do consider it a marriage. We're investing for life.
One thing that which is another way of saying what Mark just said, is I always look for, in that first meeting, do you feel like you respect this person, and do you feel like you have a lot to learn from them? Because sometimes you meet with VCs, and in the initial meeting, you kind of feel like, man, they're just like slow on the uptake, or they don't get it, or they don't see it. And sometimes you walk in, and they have this like just such an incredible amount of insight into your business that you walk out of there being like, man, even if these guys didn't invest, that sort of hour that I spent with them was such a great use of my time. I felt like I came out with a much clearer picture of what I need to do and where I need to go. And that's such a great microcosm of what the next couple years are going to be like. If you feel like you would want this person to be really involved in the company, even if they didn't have like a checkbook that they brought with them, that's probably a really good sign. And if not, that's probably a really bad sign.
Bem bacana os pontos aqui que eles trouxeram, né? Que é você ver, assim, quando você está buscando um investimento, é saber que o relacionamento que você vai ter com investidores muitas vezes vai ser parecido com um casamento, né? Então, você vai... você precisa prestar contas, né? Você precisa estar junto e entendendo os problemas que estão sendo enfrentados, quais as soluções estão sendo propostas e como que o produto, né, o serviço, como estão as vendas às vendas finais, né, relativo ao negócio, né, como que está o andamento da operação. Então, o investidor muitas vezes vai estar ali em cima cobrando, às vezes nem tanto, né, mas cabe a você deixar claro para o investidor, dizendo assim, a empresa está funcionando dessas formas, né, fazer reuniões ali mensais com ele, ou sei lá, trimestrais, né, para mostrar a evolução da empresa, né, ter indicadores ali claros, financeiros, né, mostrar não só DRS, digamos assim, né, mas conseguir mostrar tudo que a empresa está alcançando, as metas batidas, as metas planejadas, né, então conseguir fazer com que esse relacionamento seja o mais saudável possível, e quando houver um conflito, que, né, consiga ser resolvido, né, sem querer pedir um divórcio ou acabar com o investidor, né, o investimento que você está tendo ali, né. Então, tipo assim, a única coisa que se difere bastante de casamento é que eu acredito piamente que vai chegar um determinado momento que o investidor vai querer fazer o exit, né? Vai querer sair e pegar uma parte do valor referente ao equity da empresa, uma parte do valor do que ele investiu, né? E no casamento, na minha opinião, não tem você sair, né? Tipo, na minha filosofia, na minha concepção de casamento, é você, né, ir até o fim, né? E como o cara... Talvez seja a mesma filosofia do Ron Conway, porque ele falou é investir no empreendedor para a vida, né? Não é investir por um determinado tempo, né? Então, provavelmente eles continuam apoiando. Então, é isso aí, né? Boas comparações aí.
Angels and VCs, the time, money, or the lack of company.
What's the constraint on how many companies you guys can invest in?
SV Angel's kind of gotten comfortable with one a week. You certainly can't do more than that, and that's a staff of 13. So it's really the number of companies.
Ron, if you all worked twice the number of hours, would you invest in twice the number of companies?
I would advise against that. I would rather just add more value to the existing companies.
Maybe you could, I'll take the role of questioner for a second. Maybe you could you talk a little bit about conflict policy? Or not conflict policy?
Well, SV Angel actually does have a written conflict policy. But when we end up with a conflict, it's usually because one company has morphed into another space. We don't normally invest in companies that have a direct conflict. If we do, we will disclose it to the other company, to both companies. And keep in mind, at our stage, we don't know the company's product strategy anyway. We probably don't know enough to disclose. But our conflict policy also talks about this really important word, which is trust. In other words, we're off to a bad start if we don't trust each other. And with SV Angel, the relationship between the founder and us is based on trust. And if somebody doesn't trust us, then they shouldn't work with us.
Mark, will you invest in competitive companies?
Yeah, so this is actually, so let me go back to the original question, then I'll come back to that. So the original question is, this is the thing we talk about most often in our firm. So this is kind of the question that's at the heart of, I think, how all venture capital operates. Which is the question of constraints. So the big constraint on a top-tier venture capital firm, the big constraint is the concept of opportunity cost. So it's the concept that basically everything you do means that there are a whole bunch of other things that you can't do. And so it's not so much the cost, and we think about this all the time, it's not so much the cost of we invest $5 million in a company and the company goes wrong and we lose the money. That's not really the loss that we're worried about, because the theory is we'll have the winners that'll make up for that, in theory. The cost that we're worried about is every investment we make has two implications for how we run the firm. Every investment we make, number one, rules out conflicts. And so our policy for sure on venture and growth rounds is that we don't invest in conflicting companies. And so we can only invest in one company in a category. And so if we invest in MySpace and then Facebook comes along a year later, like, we're out. We can't do it, right? And so we basically every investment we make locks us out of a category, right? And the nature, that's a very complicated topic when you're discussing these things internally in these firms, because you only know the companies that already exist, right? You don't know the companies that haven't even been founded yet, right? And God help you had you invested in an early company that was not going to be the winner, and you were locked out by the time the winner emerged 3 years later, and you just couldn't make the investment. So that's one issue, is conflict policy. The other issue is opportunity cost on the time and bandwidth of the general partners. And so going back to the concept of adding value, we're a typical firm, we're a fairly typical firm of 8 general partners. Each general partner can maybe be on 10 to 12 boards in total if they're completely fully loaded.